Now, the United States President Joe Biden will pay a solidarity visit to Israel on Wednesday following the Hamas attacks. Iran, on the other hand, has warned of possible preemptive action against Israel in the coming hours. And as Tel Aviv gears up for a ground offensive on the Gaza Strip, Hamas says, "We're ready. It does not scare us." U.S. President Joe Biden will visit Israel for talks with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and to make clear that Tel Aviv has the right to defend itself. From Israel, Biden will travel to Oman for talks with Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and Jordanian King Abdullah II. Announcing Biden's Israel visit, U.S. Secretary of State said Tel Aviv and Washington had agreed to develop a plan for aid to Gaza. Blinken met for nearly 8 hours at the Defense Ministry with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The visit marked the top U.S. diplomat's second visit since the 7th of October attacks by Hamas. Previous conflicts between Hamas and Israel have ended through mediation by powers with a keen interest in West Asian peace. The casualties on both sides, Hamas killing hundreds as well as taking hostages, and Israel hitting back with deadly force, complicate any mediation plans. The role of regional kingpin Saudi Arabia remains hugely sensitive. Some analysts suggest moves to normalize the kingdom's own relationship with Israel could have been one of the motivations for the attack by Hamas. As per Washington Post, Saudi's Crown Prince snubbed the U.S. Secretary of State by making him wait for hours for a meeting before postponing it. Remember, Blinken last week visited several U.S. allies in West Asia in a bid to rally them around the United States position. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is set to visit Egypt and Israel. Egypt, it has a peace treaty with Israel and borders the Gaza Strip, a Hamas stronghold. Egypt has in the past repeatedly been called upon to act as mediator, with Cairo also happy to add to its diplomatic prestige. Iran continues to hit out at Israel. Apart from funding, Hamas's Israel arch foe backs Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran warned of a possible preemptive action against Israel in the coming hours. The Iranian foreign minister said, I'm quoting here, "The resistance leaders will not allow Israel to do whatever it wants in Gaza." A Russian-drafted UN Security Council resolution that called for a humanitarian ceasefire in the war failed to pass. Russia proposed the one-page draft text on Friday, which also called for the release of hostages, humanitarian aid access, and the safe evacuation of civilians in need. The text condemned violence against civilians and all acts of terrorism, but did not name Hamas. Meanwhile, Colombia said Israel's ambassador should leave the South American country before drawing back comments. Now, the Colombian minister initially said the Israeli envoy should at a minimum apologize and leave after criticizing Petro's comparison of Israeli attacks on Gaza with the Nazi persecution of the Jews. Later, he stated he had merely demanded respect for Colombia's president. The Colombian foreign minister said, and I'm quoting yet again, "I have not said that the Israeli ambassador is expelled." Now, joining us on the broadcast live from Washington, D.C., we have with us Mr. Jamil Anjafar. Mr. Jafar is the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute and an assistant professor of law and director of the National Security Law and Policy Program. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Sir, U.S. President Joe Biden is set to pay a solidarity visit to Israel. What's your take on the United States' involvement in the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, obviously, the United States has sent 2 aircraft carrier battle groups to the region to warn any state or non-state actor against intervening in the ongoing conflict. The conflict began by Hamas a week ago when they killed 1,400 Israelis. Beyond that, in addition, the U.S. government has sent weaponry to Israel, including small diameter bombs, as well as missiles for the Iron Dome missile defense system.
Right, so now Iran has also warned of possible preemptive action against Israel in the coming hours. What's your assessment of this? What would be the practical implications of Iran's involvement, and what do you think has triggered this warning by Iran?
Well, let's be clear. Iran is already involved. Iran has long been involved in this area, in this fight against Israel. They have been funding Hamas for years. They funded Lebanese Hezbollah as well, which is conducting attacks against Israel in the north. And has long conducted attacks in Lebanon. And Iran has long funded attacks against the United States as well, including during the time the United States was in Iraq by funding Kataib Hezbollah and Ansar al-Haq. So Iran has and is already involved in this fight. If they get more engaged and continue to be involved, they will likely have to suffer consequences as a result. So it is not to Iran's benefit to get increasingly involved in this conflict at this point.
So aid to Gaza has emerged as a priority as well. Over 1 million Gazans have been displaced. U.S. President Joe Biden also said that invasion and occupation of Gaza by Israel would be a big mistake. This as Israel gears up for a ground offensive. How do you see the situation unfolding going forward?
Well, there's no question that Israel is going into Gaza. That is happening. They are going to go in and do everything they can to take Hamas out. This is a terrorist organization that has been designated by the United States as a terrorist group since 1997. They've repeatedly conducted attacks against U.S. interests as well as against Israel. And so that's what Israel's going to go in to do. Now, I don't think Israel has any interest in occupying Gaza. There's no benefit for them. It's a challenging situation. And so the question of what happens after Hamas is dealt with, which will take a while, is a much tougher question. It's clear Egypt does not want to get involved there in Gaza. It's clear the United States doesn't want to be involved, and nor do the Israelis in terms of a long-term situation. The most likely organization that can take responsibility there is the Palestinian Authority. But of course, the people of Gaza themselves have voted against the Palestinian Authority and voted for Hamas in prior elections.
Right, sir, and we see that the impact of this has not been limited to the region. It is spilling beyond. We've seen the hate crimes that have risen as well. What's your take on the situation?
Well, look, I mean, you think about the situation that the Israelis face. The United States lost about 3,000, just under 3,000 people on September 11, 2001. That's on a population of about 350 million. If you calculate on a population-adjusted basis, the 1,400 people lost by the Israelis is the equivalent on their 9 million population of about 16 9/11s. So the kind of attacks you see against Israelis there by Hamas and then the threats against them worldwide are a real serious situation. Now, obviously, people are concerned about the plight of the Palestinian people, but there can be no justification whatsoever for Hamas's terrorist attacks that took place in Israel a week ago now.
All right. Well, Mr. Jaffer, thank you so much for joining us on WION with your insights and perspective on this.
Thank you for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.